Oh, sure.
I know, we can't, because it has to be working.
Because you cannot get a certificate of occupancy to use the new part of the building until all aspects of the building are connected in one fire system. And there was a problem with the fire system equipment. And so they did not pass the county inspection the last time the inspector was here. Okay?
That's the reason. No, because one of the Americans so many times.
Do not re-enter the building until directed to by the proper authority.
No, because if they can get it done this morning, okay, then they can contact the
Something emergency is going on at the temple.
to see if the inspector, county inspector can come in and
Proceed to the nearest exit and leave the building.
this way.
Do not
Hopefully,
re-enter the building
the deal
until
is if
directed
they
to
come
by the proper
tomorrow,
authority.
if they pass, it means the auditorium can be used for
Attention, an emergency situation has been detected in this building. Proceed to the nearest exit and leave the building. Do not re-enter the building until directed to by the proper authority. Attention, an emergency situation has been detected in this building. Proceed to the nearest exit and leave the building. Do not re-enter the building until directed to by the proper
Volume
authority.
control. Volume 60%. Volume 73%.
They should do it in the afternoon when they're not working.
Well, I'm just explaining why it has. If it's corrected this morning, they can then call the county in the afternoon to try to arrange the county inspector to come in the morning.
The county is not open the afternoon.
An emergency situation has been detected in this building.
Okay, I'm going to,
What's going on in the shul?
By the proper authority.
okay? Good
Rabbi,
morning.
what's happening in the shul?
Nothing's happening in this year. Don't worry about it.
I finally got you on video. Good to be back in your class.
And I can't start till the noise goes down. Anyway.
Can somebody shut it off?
Right. Okay.
No way to reset that?
What?
There's no way to reset that?
There is a way to reset it. That's what we're working on. Okay.
Proceed to the nearest exit and
I
leave
finally joined your class and look what happened.
until directed to by the proper authority.
Right. Okay.
Attention,
Oh, shit.
an emergency situation has been detected in this building. Proceed to the nearest exit and leave the building. Do not re-enter the building until directed to by the proper authority.
20 minutes.
Attention, an emergency situation.
Okay, I'm going to talk over the item. I'm going to start with our bracha, and then I have two handouts for everyone today.
Volume 100%.
No. Okay, thank you. Okay, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay. All right. Now, to get us underway, I have two handouts. We may not get to both of them today. I believe we may only get to one. I want to indicate to those people that are on Zoom, I do not have a chance to try to upload it onto the, to be a screen sharing. So you will have to listen to us as we read part of it, but I will make them sure that they have them available either here in the shul office, or you can contact me directly, okay? All right, so where are we headed today? We've looked at Rashi's Chumash commentary. We did not spend much time on the Nach, on his commentary on Nevi'im Ketuvim, except to indicate that there was some question about the Ketuvim, parts of Isaiah and parts of Tehillim, where Rashi may have been responding to non-Jewish commentary, okay? But to be aware of the fact that that is a question among biographers and historians as to whether Rashi was really writing any kind of polemic, anti-Gentile statements as part of his commentary, okay? What I want to do, and we looked at a little bit about the Gemara commentary, more the characteristics of that than specific examples, right? Otherwise, we would have been back to a Daf Yomi kind of situation, okay? But I do want us to go on now today, and this will take us at least a couple of sessions, looking back again at an aspect of history that could have had a major impact on Rashi and the Jews of his time, okay? And that is leading us to look at the First Crusades, okay? So what I have as handouts for today will be two items. One is a map of what the First Crusade transpired in Europe, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about leading up to the First Crusade, okay? The other is some texts that I was able to obtain from some material in terms of a description of the impact of the First Crusade on the Jewish community, and in some ways its impact on Rashi and his own family.
What happened? The picture stopped. The picture froze.
Okay, he lived his life among the nation. There are both certain positive aspects of that, okay, which we'll talk about in a little more detail, as well as some other elements, okay, of that, okay? So whether we saw the Chumash commentary, okay, or whether we'll look at other examples in the Nevi'im and Ketuvim, the writings that he wrote on prophets and writings, okay? Or even if we were to sit down and analyze specific examples of Rashi's commentary on the Talmud, okay? One of the things that Sharashevsky, in his book on Rashi, and he sort of took that book as one of a number of sources, but his title is what helped us come up with the title for this shiur, okay? Was the fact that Rashi was a keen observer of society. Remember we mentioned the fact that he lived, I'm going to need that book.
I give it to you
You
because
gave it
they're
to
on
me?
the counter.
Oh, all right.
No,
At the Bima.
on the beam.
Oh, yeah, okay. So Sharashevsky's book, Rashi, the Man in His World, is how he titled it, okay? Because he has an entire chapter on this element of Rashi as an observer of society, of somebody who, because the fairs we talked about, remember, the economic events that were held there in the city of Troy twice a year. Okay, that he was going to be aware of certain kinds of artisans, craftsmen, and how they did their work. He would use that as an example to help interpret sections of the Torah and the Talmud, because he saw the relationship between Jew and Gentile in his day. Okay? A Jewish person would need to have their wagon wheel fixed. Who would they go to? They would need to have a utensil for their home. Who would they go to? Who were the craftsmen? They weren't all Jews. There were Gentiles as well. And so he was aware of that interaction. He would observe the craftsmen, okay, in their, so to speak, natural environment, okay? And so it's using that example that at least Sharashevsky wants to point out. That is one of the things that made Rashi's explanations of the Tanakh and the Gemara so important. I'll just take one quick example and then I'll come back. When Rashi talks about, let's say, the garments of the Kohen Gadol, okay? We're all relatively familiar with what some of those garments might have been. Okay? One of them we can think of is a breastplate, Urim V'Tumim, okay? How did the Kohen Gadol wear that? Anybody remember from the Chumash? Okay, they were like straps over the shoulders, right?
Right.
Right, okay, and it was on top of other garments.
Yeah.
Okay, so, okay, so he had, what let's call for the moment, normal clothes, certain garments. Remember, the Kohen Gadol had 8 garments,
Wow.
okay,
Did
compared
you have to wear them all at the same time?
when he was serving in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, as opposed to a regular Kohen who only wore 4 garments. Okay,
Interesting.
but one of those garments the Kohen Gadol wore was, like I said, the Urim V'Tumim, which would be like a metal breastplate. Okay, now what did Rashi do? He compared it to certain garments that were worn by people in his own day. Old French language explains that there was a certain kind of breast coat or breastplate that a noble or somebody of status would wear. Okay? And so Rashi would point that out so that his students, be they in the yeshiva or learning on their own, could identify with that particular kind of garment. Okay, okay, I'll give another example, a slightly different one, and then we'll pick up. Okay, in tomorrow's daf, Yomi, one of the questions comes up is about a certain kind of headwear. Okay, and it happens that Art Scroll and the Koren Gemara translate the term differently. Okay, but the implication is that it was a kind of headwear, okay, that particularly men of the rabbinic class, we'll use that term, would wear, okay, as a way of covering their heads. Now, if we think of the Middle East, what kind of headgear do you normally, thank you, exactly, turbans, okay? So one translation happens to call it a turban, okay? Which, if you're familiar with the Middle East, you would have a particular image of what that would be. The other translation calls it a kind of scarf. we normally would think of a scarf around what part of the body? A neck. That's how we would normally identify. Okay? But when you think of certain in the Middle East, okay, how was the turban put on? It was taken and wrapped around the same way we might wrap around a scarf around our neck. Okay, but at times, if you see certain pictures of the Middle East, if they're in the desert or Bedouin or something like that, how do they wear sometimes their head, right? It is the turban, but it's also wrapped so it covers from the nose down, that only the eyes are visible. Okay? So regardless of how a particular translation of the Gemara says, okay, both identify this as a head covering worn by a certain class of men, okay, in those times. And therefore, okay, we relate to it based on what, in some cases, our own experience, our own understanding. So in a sense, Rashi's explanation of certain things is like that kind of situation, okay? He lived in a major city. The major city, Troy, was a trade center, right? There was industry there, okay? They hosted, we said, the commercial fairs at various times during the year. They welcomed exhibitors and consumers to display their wares, right? That would give Rashi ample time if he attended those fairs, okay, and which we said he probably did, because one of the ways that he could have gotten access to manuscripts was by merchants who were coming to the city from other locations, particularly if he wanted to get manuscripts from the yeshivas in mines, in Worms, in places like that. Okay, so they would come from those parts of Germany, come to Troy, sell their wares, whatever, do their business, right? So it also allowed, we said, for a certain amount of interaction between Jews and Gentiles. Now, Sharashevsky, as I said in his book, cites the following. Rashi's commentaries show his remarkable familiarity with the crafts and industries of his period and his world. His observation of the activities of artisans, tradesmen, and shopkeepers in Troy provided biblical, if it's too cold, we'll readjust it again. Okay? Talmudic terms with graphic explanations which not only helped his contemporaries to an understanding of the Bible and Talmud in terms of their own day, but also have given later generations interesting glimpses of life and work in medieval cities. Okay? So it helped his contemporaries, but it also means that later scholars who wanted to find out about crafts and things like that in medieval France will see the old French that Rashi uses sometimes and identify that. Okay? Another aspect that I think we need to,
excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. In the Gemara, do they have the same thing happen among some of the rabbis who were also working people? Would they make a reference to?
in Rashi's commentary on the Gemara.
No, just like you're pointing out, Rashi did it because he was part of the society. So what about the Chazal?
Right, they also were.
Gemara, don't they make mentions like that?
All the time.
Yeah, so
All the time.
what's the difference?
Okay, what's the Chiddush? The Chiddush is that, okay, Chazal mentions it in the Gemara because they were part of that society, right? You have sandlers, right? Shoemakers that were rabbis. You have various other professions mentioned, okay? Rashi, however, was in a little bit different class. Okay, he was a little bit beside, most of his time was taking up either supervising his vineyards, right? Or teaching, or writing, okay? So I think there was a little bit of a difference there. But it reminded me of the idea, technology changes, but aspects of the human condition, that does not change. Okay, all right. So what happens? Rashi's aim is to show, I suggest, various behavior patterns and mannerisms that he feels were as true in his day, and that they reflected oftentimes, particularly in the time of the Gemara, okay, the attitude, the relationships that people would have in those days. Okay, he acknowledges that the individuals differ in their conception of what's proper. Okay, Rashi oftentimes would comment, and I'm going to give you some examples in just a moment, okay, of what he felt was proper behavior and in terms of society, and identify it similar at least to the times of Chazal, if not to the times of the Chumash. Okay. Let's take a couple of specifics. We just said that Rashi was involved in viticulture, right, in producing wine. Okay. How many people think that Rashi could have seen a few intoxicated people in his day?
A lot.
Right? Walking through the streets of Troy, okay? He would have seen very possible occasions, situations of intoxication, okay? All right, let's take another example.
Did he sell wine or he sold grapes?
Okay. He was involved in viticulture on a large scale. So therefore, it meant he grew the grapes, or grapes for sale in terms of the production of the wine and wine itself. So one of the chuvas.
Did he sell grapes to
Well, he could have sold from his vineyard, he could have sold to other producers. Okay, all right.
Rashi?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Let's take just a quick, a couple of other examples. So he would have seen intoxication. Okay. Other places he writes about proper dress for men and for women. Why would Rashi be concerned? How would he know about proper dress for women? He had 3 daughters. Okay. And so clearly then he was aware of, okay, the style of dress of women of his day. He was aware of issues of tzniut, of modesty, okay, and things of that nature. So again, proper dress, proper both for women and for men. Where would Rashi, for example, get any knowledge of medicine? Chazal, from his study of Gemara and the commentaries, aside, right? Plus, we have to assume that he and others had interaction with whoever was in the, so to speak, medical profession of his day. Therefore, he would learn or talk, okay? As an educated person, he would talk with these, let's call them for the moment, doctors, and he might ask, Dr. So-and-so, where do you get that medicine from? What would the doctor tell him? Plants. And he would just mention to Rashi, from such and such a plant. I crush the leaves, I produce whatever, okay? So the concept of mortar and pestle, okay? Grinding the plant, producing the medicine, things like that, okay? And clearly the Gemara refers to examples of that as well. Right? So again, another aspect.
Also,
yeah.
Very significantly, this is in my mind from somewhere I heard it.
From where, yeah.
I don't remember when, 100 years ago, that his knowledge of, I'll call him the Goyim, of the Goyim's religion,
Right,
that he knew what was going on in the church.
right, right.
In fact, that I think, I heard this maybe mentioned,
No,
that,
we
that
didn't hear what he said.
didn't consider
come
them
back.
Avodah Zarah next because of
Yeah,
Yayin
come on.
Nessa.
Right, okay.
Well,
So let's come back. I'm gonna take what you suggested and work it.
No, that he
Yeah.
met people
Okay,
who knew about
so
them.
Rashi's interaction, okay, we said was that the fact that the Jewish quarter in the city was between the mercantile center and the largest Catholic church in the city. And, okay, so he was familiar with the goings on of the non-Jewish community. By the way, remember there was no Protestantism at those days. There was only the Catholic Church. Okay, all right. So, but Rashi, interestingly enough, because he must have had interaction with the medical community, was not above being a little bit critical of the medical community of his day. We know that there are places, okay, in his commentaries, for example, where he criticizes the idea that inappropriate behavior on the part of the doctors caused the death of patients, or that those, what?
That happened to them.
Well, or that those who were impoverished did not get the same kind of medical care as the nobility or the well-to-do
Hasn't changed.
crafts, things like that. So Rashi was very much, okay, aware of these kinds of factors.
So he was very worldly.
Really, right? Let's take another example. Again, I can come back to the model of the garments of the Kohen Gadol. Okay, what were they made from?
Me-
Metal.
And stones.
Okay, and it's precious stones.
Oh, precious
right?
stones.
Okay, who else would have had metal and precious stones in those days?
King.
Jewelers, right? They would have worked on it, but the monarchy, right? Okay, and besides the monarchy, other aspects of the nobility. The duke of the local town, okay, could have had certain kinds of adornments, let's use that word for the moment, okay, made from metal and precious stones. So Rashi would have been familiar again with the craftsmen, with the artisans that did metal work. Okay? So again, when he talks about aspects of the garments of the Kohen Gadol, when he talks about the building of the Mishkan, when he talks about other elements in the Gemara, he can refer to these because he's had the opportunity to observe these craftsmen carry out their trade. Okay, and in doing so, he's more familiar then with those and applies that idea, that those methods rather, to what was going on. Okay, that could apply also to tools and to other kinds of things that were not just limited to the nobility. Okay, kitchen utensils. Okay, for example, writing utensils. Okay, all of these household items that we think, for example, that exist, that we sometimes take for granted. Okay, let's take one simple one more as an example, and then we'll go on. The Gemara talks about this past Chol HaMoed. What kind of this in the current daf? What kind of work could be done or not done on the intermediate day of a holiday? And it lists specifically certain kinds of items where if there is a danger to your residence and you need to repair something, that work is permitted on the intermediate days of the holiday. Okay? Let's think of an example that we all can relate to. A door. A door has hinges. A door has a lock. You need a key. What happens if the key got broken off in the lock? Anybody? What? You need a locksmith. There too, they had to have locksmiths. They had keys. They had to be able to open doors. So if the door was broken, either the hinges of the door or the lintel of the door, if any of those things were broken, the Gemara specifically says it is permitted to repair them on Chol HaMoed. You say, of course. Why? Because the question is, the one carrying out the work becomes like a day worker, a day wager, and therefore that's questionable on Chol HaMoed, because you're only paying him for the time of that day. He shouldn't be working ordinarily on that day. But okay, so it's not.
You have your lock fixed at home, right?
What?
You have your lock.
Yes. So the answer would be yes. Okay. All right. So these are examples, whether it's household furnishings, whether it's foodstuffs, whether these other kinds of commentaries, okay, that we see existed. Now, again, we pointed out that all of this also reflects the interaction between Jews and Gentiles in Rashi's time. And that leads us really up to a little bit of talking now about what happened with the First Crusade. Okay? And so I'm going to give out a handout. We're not going to start reading it today. Okay? But, okay, if you take and, okay, and pass. Okay. Okay, so what I want to talk about is the following as we get started. Okay, we're not going to read it through right now, but I wanted us to have it, okay, and to be able to access some of the information. The year is 1095, okay? A special council by Pope Urban II is called in the city of Clermont, southern France. Okay. Thank you. All right. This is a papal council in which, okay, if you look, I don't know if it shows it here on, okay, on in this map, okay, on this handout.
I'm looking where I
Okay.
was born. Oh, I did
But,
one for myself. Oh,
All right.
I need one. It's not one, but it's
Okay.
next to-
But on the,
next to Ukraine.
okay, the second page, if you look, okay, you look at the part marked France, right? You'll see where Toulouse is, where Lyon is, right? So Clermont is down there in the southern part of France, and Troy, okay, would be just above, not
Meeting.
far away from Paris. So Pope Urban II calls this council, and he is concerned because of the fact that there has been a change in the Middle East, in the land of Israel, and particularly in Jerusalem. The Seljuk Turks have recently converted to Islam. Seljuk Turks, okay, from Turkey, okay, and they've converted to Islam, and they are Fabrenta, if we use that language, okay? They are, okay? Such new converts sometimes, they're now approaching Constantinople, which is the seat of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Okay? The religious center of the Orthodox Church, the Emperor of Constantinople, appeals to Pope Urban II for help because of these, okay? And the Pope then in this papal council gathers nobles, he gathers clergy, right? And he convinces them that it is their duty to go and free what was Arab lands in the Middle East and particularly Jerusalem from the what's going to happen with if these Seljuk Turks take over the area. No, we're going to get to it, but I just wanted to have it because it gives us some sense, all right? So what happens? What does he use to convince them? 2 or 3 different arguments. Argument number 1 is that he explains to them that during the time of the general Arab rule and control, Christian pilgrims were, I wouldn't necessarily say welcome, but they were allowed to travel to Christian holy sites. And they were allowed to do their whatever rituals they wanted to do when they visited those Christian holy sites. Okay, and the general Arab community did not put any limitations on them. However, the Seljuk Turks, if they take over, and at some point they did, okay, that they committed outrages against individual pilgrims, and they tried to destroy Christian shrines. So that was argument number 1. Christian pilgrims would not be able to go to visit their holy sites in Jerusalem and throughout the Galilee and other places, okay, if the Seljuk Turks retain control. Item number 2, okay, the church had I guess I would call it a program of what they called penance. Okay? And for this penance, okay, you could pay the church a certain amount of money, and then the sin would be obliterated. It would be wiped clean. Okay? So, again, the Pope would offer any nobility that would lead to, or any common people who would go and gather as part of a crusade, they would get free pass, okay? They would get such a penance. So that was a second criteria, a second way that he convinced them. The third, okay, was really very simple. There was money there that they could take. Whatever they conquered, whatever they took from the Seljuk Turks, they could keep. So both nobility and common people on all levels saw this as an opportunity. Okay, under the rubric of the church, to go ahead and travel. Okay, what happens in the year 1096? Okay, the first crusade. Okay, they begin the march to the Holy Land. Okay, now, were they going to go by cruise ships? I don't think so. They were going to go by boats. Okay, they certainly weren't flying, right? So where would they march? Think about it. The easiest thing would be go from Netherlands, France, Germany, that area, maybe England, go on foot through Germany, down to Italy, go towards certain ports in Italy, and then by ship, if they could afford ship, okay, then to go to the Middle East. Right? Okay. So that was the route.
How long did it take them? How long did it take them to reach Israel?
The question, really, it's a good question, but the important thing is, it's not how long it took them. The important thing is, what did they do on the way?
Yes, of course, they didn't go straight. Now that we
Right?
know that.
They
Okay?
destroyed everything on the way.
Okay.
Okay, but that's true, but the question
They
is,
Right.
destroyed
So since they were already going to travel through that area, and their goal was to what? To fight against the non-Christians, to uproot, okay, all of them. Well, who did you find that were non-Christians along the way?
Jews.
The Jews.
And the Muslims too.
Okay.
Not just the
Well,
Jews.
very few, very few.
Why didn't they?
Not at this point in Europe. Okay, but you found Jewish communities, right? Okay. So what happens is, while the Crusades, so to speak, mark the end of the Middle Ages, right, and feudalism, it's important for us to understand the impact that these early Crusades had on Jewish communities in northern France and in the Rhine area, okay? And how this impacted on Rashi towards the end of his life, okay? Now, okay, before we start looking at this handout, I'm going to give the second one, because I do want us to look at this one together.
You can tell the whole shore?
What?
You can tell the whole shore?
You're funny.
I'm gonna look at and this one we are going to read. Okay? Now, we said 1096.
1096. I wrote that.
Okay? All right. We have for everybody? Okay.
26.
This account is by an eyewitness, Solomon Bar Samson, who saw what the Crusaders did to Mayence. Remember, there were major yeshivas, Jewish communities in Mayence, Mainz, Worms, okay, these places in the Rhine area. Okay? That was where Rashi had studied. We talked about Rabbeinu Gershom, okay, even before. So there was already 2, 3, 4 generations of Jews living in those locations. They established Jewish communities, yeshivas, work, etc., who saw what the Crusaders did to Mayence, the site of the once flourishing yeshiva of Rabbeinu Gershom. Promised protection by the bishop.
What are you reading? They destroyed them.
Top on this page, okay? The local, all right, by the bishop, the Jews hid in the church courtyard where they learned of the Crusaders' approach. The local non-Jewish townspeople, fearful of the rampaging mob, opened the gates to the Crusaders. The Jews had 2 choices: to convert to Christianity and live, or die as Jews. They decided to die for their faith, fighting off the Crusaders as best they could when they saw the inevitable coming. They decided to kill themselves and to die as Jewish martyrs for the glory of God's name. Now, this is, as we're going to read it, I don't know if we'll finish the whole thing today, but we'll see. The Crusaders in Mayence. It was on the 3rd of Sivan, at noon, that Emicho, the wicked, the enemy of the Jews, came with his whole army against the city gate and the local people opened it up for him. Then the Crusaders said to each other, "Look, they have opened up the gate for us. Now let us avenge the blood of Jesus."
Oh, my God.
The Jews who were there sought refuge in the court of the bishop, the head of the local church. They were martyrs who feared the Most High. Even though they saw the great multitude, an army numerous as the sand on the shore of the sea, they still clung to their Creator. Then young and old donned their armor and girded on their weapons. Notice they did not give up without a fight. Okay? At their head was Rabbi Kalonimus ben Meshulam, the chief of the community. Okay? Yet because of the many troubles and the fasts which they had observed, they had no strength to stand up against the enemy. Okay, they had prayed. Okay, just like on other occasions when disaster is going to fall, one fasts and prays again. Okay, they were indeed a poor support. Okay? I'm sorry. The enemy then came gangs and bands of crusaders, sweeping through like a flood until Mayence was filled from end to end. The foe Emiko proclaimed in the hearing of the community that the Jews be driven from the city and be put to flight. Panic was great in the town. Okay? Each Jew girded on his weapons, all moved towards the palace gate to fight the crusaders. They fought each other up to the very gate, but because of the sins of the Jews, the enemy overcame them and took the gate. The hand of the Lord was heavy against his people. The bishop's men, who had promised to help them, were the very first to flee, thus delivering the Jews into the hands of the enemy. They were indeed a poor support. Even the bishop himself fled from his church, afraid he would be killed because he had spoken good things of the Jews. When the Jews saw that the heavenly decree of death had been issued and that the enemy had conquered them and had entered the courtyard, then all of them, old men and young women and children, servants and maids, cried out together to their Father in heaven. With a whole heart and with a willing soul, they then spoke, "After all, it is not right to criticize the acts of God. Blessed be he and blessed be his name, who had given to us his Torah and a command to put ourselves to death, to kill ourselves for his holy name. Happy are we if we do his will. Happy is anyone who is killed or slaughtered, who dies for his name, so that he is ready to enter the world to come, to dwell in the heavenly camp with the righteous, with Rabbi Akiba and his companions, who were also killed for his name's sake." Now I think this is the end of May. They're thinking back to Aseret Harugei Malchut, the story that was read right on Yom Kippur. But remember, we should also know that there is a Kina, an elegy on Tisha B'Av that's also recited that repeats that same story. So both in the fall, so to speak, and coming into the summer, they're in between that time period, they would be aware of that particular example. Okay, let's go on, next page. Then all of them to a man cried out with a loud voice, "Now we must delay no longer, for the enemy is already upon us. Let us hasten and offer ourselves as a sacrifice to the Lord. Let him who has a knife examine it, that it does not be nicked." Okay, in other words, that's one of the rules for ritual slaughter, shechita. Okay, let him come and slaughter us for the sanctification of the Holy One, the everlasting. Then after we are dead, let him cut his own throat or plunge the knife into his own body. The women there gathered their strength and slew their sons and their daughters and then themselves. Many men too plucked up courage and killed their wives, their sons, their infants. The tender and delicate mother slaughtered the baby she had played with. All of them, men and women, arose and slaughtered one another. The maidens and the young brides and grooms looked out of the windows and a loud voice cried, "Look and see, O our God, what we do for the sanctification of thy great name, in order not to convert to Christianity." Thus were the precious children of Zion, the Jews of my aunts, tried with 10 trials like Abraham our father. They bound their sons as Abraham bound Isaac his son, and they received upon themselves with a willing soul the yoke of the fear of God, the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be he. The ears of him who hears these things will tingle, for all who has ever heard anything like this. Inquire now and look about. Was there ever such an abundant sacrifice as this since the days of Adam? Were there ever 1,100 offerings on one day, each of them like the sacrifice of Isaac, the son of Abraham? Will thou, despite this, still restrain thyself, O Lord? For thy sake it was that these numberless souls were killed. Avenge quickly the blood of thy servants, which was spilt in our days and in our sight. Amen. Okay. So that comes from Jacob Marcus's book, The Jew in the Medieval World.
End meeting or leave meeting?
What? Question. Sorry, I didn't hear it. Want to repeat the question? Okay.
So he's
Oh,
talking
okay.
About 1,000 people.
At least 1,000, right? Okay, so we see here a description, okay, of what happened on that day. Next week, we'll pick up and we'll talk a little bit about the question of how was Rashi afflicted himself under this circumstance.
And that was in the 1100?
This was 1096,
Yes.
right?
So obviously.
It was the first of a multiple crusades, and it struck primarily in the area of the Rhine, the area of these cities. So next time, we'll look more at this handout, okay, which was actually a student, okay, who did a report on that. We'll see what she wrote about it, how she explains it, what happened, and then we'll come back and we'll actually see that Rashi himself writes a kina, an elegy on this particular situation.
But obviously, some of them had knives that are kind of, because otherwise you don't usually have a knife on when you.
Right.
But when they.
So it means like a thousand
My aunt
here,
and-
from
There
the
was more than
1000.
one crusade. How many crusaders were there?
How many crusades in general? 3 or 4 crusades, if I remember.
And they were all between the 10
10th and 11th century.
to 11 or from 10 to the 15? The first
I would
crusade?
say 10th, 11th century. All right, the 1100s into the 1200s. And we're going to see in another text that that I'm going to have us read in 1147, another example of a crusade.
Did they come? They came all the way to Jerusalem.
Right.
They came out.
Names and my aunt are the same way.
Akko?
Right, Akko, Jerusalem,
They have
a
something
variety of
like that.
places.
My father worked there. And
All right, thank you, everybody.
Yeah. 1960. He worked there. They have a big ceramic house.
Yeah, Mrs. Mom.